Okay, so yes, yeah, it seems like everybody is happy and everything is running smoothly. So let's get the session going with our next online class. Okay, so just once again from my side, a warm welcome for our next session for Financial Accounting for Companies, FAC 2601, as we resume our online classes after the assessments the last couple of weeks. Just by way of introduction, I am Frank Montgomery, one of the lecturers for this module, and I'll be the host this morning in going through our next online class. So once again, just the rules regarding the session. As I've said, the session is recorded. I have started the recording. Just for ease and working through the session, it is just easier because during the session, I can't see any questions popping up. So if you can just populate any questions that you might have and drop them in the Q&A section for at the end when I'm done with my presentation. So as soon as I'm done with my presentation, I will then go to the Q&A section and engage with all the questions that were posted down there and try my utter best to provide you with answers and solutions to the issues that you might have. With regards to the recording, once again, later this afternoon, the recording should be up and running and available on our module site to the benefit of those students that could not attend this morning. And obviously, if you want to go back and refresh on something that was covered during the session today, it will be made available on our Moodle module site, the FAC 261 site that you obviously engage with and log into to access all your study material as well as your assessments. Okay, as far as the other lecturers are concerned, these are the two other lecturers, our module responsible lecturer, Mr. Baloyi, and then my other colleague, Mr. Isley, the two other lecturers involved with me in FAC 2601. To get in contact with us, you should already be familiar with the options available. Your best option is normally through the email address. It's a module mailbox number, fac2601@unisa.ac.za. So that is the official mailbox for the module itself. You can also go onto Moodle on the module site itself and use the message function to directly engage with a specific lecturer, or you can make use of the discussion forum that is also available on our module site as well. So those are your options to your disposal to get in contact with the module itself. So as far as the content of the lecture is concerned, the purpose of today's lecture is to go through our next lesson tool, which is revenue. Revenue covered by accounting standard IFRS 15. What we will be doing once again is to look at the applicable accounting standard or standards, which in this case is IFRS 15, run through a little bit of theory with regards to the actual model itself, and then look at some application and practical examples of the theory itself. So this lecture is covering lesson tool number 9, which deals with revenue. Okay, and as I then said, we'll go through the standard itself, the theory of the standard, the application, as well as then the practical examples that we need to run through to cover revenue. Okay, as far as revenue is concerned, revenue from contracts with customers in terms of IFRS 15 is all about reporting useful information about the nature of the revenue. Obviously, where did the revenue originate from? The amount, obviously, of the revenue which needs to be disclosed, and what is the correct amount that needs to be disclosed in terms of IFRS 15. The timing of the revenue itself. When should the revenue be recorded? Is it applicable for a current financial year, or can we only record it in a next financial period? So all of this is determined and administered within IFRS 15, revenue from contracts with customers. reporting useful information about the nature, amount, and timing, or if there's uncertainty of revenue and cash flows. Remember, in some instances, the revenue as such, it is not clear what is the actual amount or details that should be recorded due to uncertainty regarding cash flows. If there's any uncertainty regarding the revenue or the cash flow of the revenue in the future, this is again covered by IFRS 15 to determine exactly how it should be dealt with and how we should disclose and make provision for it within our financial statements that we draft at the end of a financial period. In terms of income that we find within IFRS 15, your income defined in your conceptual framework. Remember, one of the very first lesson tools that we covered was the conceptual framework of 2018, the updated conceptual framework. Now, within this conceptual framework, it stipulates that income can be defined as either being an increase in an asset or a decrease in a liability, with the net result being an increase in equity, other than from contributions from equity participants. So this excludes a capital contribution, because a capital contribution can obviously not be seen as revenue, even though equity will increase. So increase in assets is basically increase in assets, or sorry, a decrease in liabilities with the resulting increase in equity is defined as any income with regards to revenue itself, other than any contributions coming from your equity participants. Revenue as such is seen as that income arising in the course of an entity's ordinary activities. Okay, so you to remember now, your ordinary activities, if you are a manufacturing concern, any income derived from the normal activities to manufacture and sell anything will be seen as the income arising from the course of the ordinary activities, and as such should be recognized as revenue. It is disclosed as the first line item on the face of the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income. Bearing in mind, if you refer back to IFRS 18, okay, the disclosure of financial statements, you would have seen that there are different categories with regards to revenue recognition. We are only dealing with the revenue recognition from normal, in other words, from operating activities. So this is your operating income that we're dealing with. Only the income that stems from ordinary activities and through the ordinary activities and course of business of an entity. This is the revenue that is dealt with in IFRS 15. In other words, not income or any revenue from investments, for example. That is a separate category that is dealt with. So this is only looking at a specific revenue arising through the ordinary activities of an entity. So this standard determines exactly when and how much revenue should be recognized. And they provide us with a 5-step revenue model. And that 5-step revenue model stipulates, first of all, we need to identify the contract to see if there is a contract entered into that will result in revenue. So that is the very first step with regards to revenue recognition. Okay, so step 1 is basically with regards to identify a contract that will lead to revenue. The second step will be to identify the performance obligation. Okay, so that would be the second step with regards to our 5-step model. The next step will be to determine the transaction price. Okay, we need to determine what is the transaction price, because if there's no transaction price, if we can't determine the transaction price, it won't be possible to allocate revenue. How much revenue should be recognized if there's no transaction price? Once we've got the transaction price, this needs to be allocated to the performance obligation. Now, as we go further, you can see within a contract, there might be separate or different performance obligations. So if there are different performance obligations, it is then to allocate the transaction price between the different performance obligations in a specific way or manner, whether it be pro rata or the contribution of each with regards to establishing how much revenue should be allocated. Once we've done that, we can then recognize the revenue in the financial statements. So that represents the basic 5 steps that we need to follow with regards to revenue recognition. So identify the contract. There needs to be a contract. If there's no contract in place, there can't be any revenue. Once we've got a contract in place, identify the performance obligation or obligations within this contract. Once we've identified that, we need to determine the transaction price within this contract. If we've identified the transaction price, we need to allocate that to the different or single performance obligation. And once we've allocated that, obviously, then we can recognize the revenue in our financial statements. Okay, so basic 5-step model to follow. With regards to that, a contract, what is a contract? A contract is an agreement between at least 2, there could be more parties, which creates enforceable rights and obligations. So when there is a valid contract in place, it means there is a right and obligation that you are bound by within this contract. So between the 2 parties, the one will have a right to enforce the contract to be concluded, and the other one will have an obligation to comply with the agreement within the contract itself. A contract asset is an entity's right to consideration in exchange for goods or services, which the entity has transferred to a customer when that right is subject to something other than the passage of time. Okay, for example, the entity's future performance. So, for example, if we sold a product on credit, there is a contract between the 2 parties. There is enforceable rights and obligations. What is our right in terms of the contract asset? You sold on credit. In other words, it means we've created a debtor that owes us the money. We have the right to collect the money from the debtor, which we will recognize as a contract asset. The obligation with the other party is a contract liability, because now that liability is the obligation to transfer to the customer goods or services for which the entity has received consideration, or the amount is due from the customer. So again, if we now would have bought something on credit, it means we have to fulfill our obligation to pay that creditor as per the terms of the contract that we entered into. So within an entity, you can have either the contract asset or a contract liability, which means you have got the rights to collect money or goods, or we have an obligation to deliver goods or to pay an outstanding liability due to a contract that was established between the 2 willing parties, creating enforceable rights and obligations for both parties. A customer is a party that has contracted with an entity to obtain goods or services that are an output of the entity's or the activities in exchange for consideration. So that's basically the customer of our manufacturing entity. They have ordered goods or they've bought goods, so they're entitled, due to the nature of our business of manufacturing items, to receive these goods and in due course within the ordinary activities of our entity itself. Income we've already discussed in terms of the conceptual framework by saying it's an increase in economic benefits during the accounting period in the form of inflows or enhancements of assets or decreases of liabilities. Okay, decreases of liabilities that result in an increase in equity other than those relating to contributions from equity of the participants. So any movement, any increase in assets or decrease in liabilities not caused by capital contributions or equity movements will be considered as income. A performance obligation, on the other hand, is a promise within a contract with a customer to transfer either a good or a service or a bundle of goods or services that is distinct or is a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same and that have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. So what does that in short mean? A good or service is distinct if the customer can benefit from it on its own or with other available resources, and it is separable from other promises in the contract. So what are the key aspects of distinct goods or services? The distinct criteria is a good or service is distinct if it is capable of being distinct. In other words, the customer benefits on its own with other resources and is distinct within the context of the contract. In other words, it's not heavily customized or integrated with other promised goods. A bundle of goods or services. A bundle is considered a single performance obligation if the individual items are not distinct from one another, often because they are highly interrelated or customized together. Now, a series of distinct goods or services is a series. For example, a daily cleaning or monthly maintenance is treated as a single performance obligation if they are substantially the same and follow the same pattern of transfer over time. In other words, it is like a repetitive, repeating service that needs to be delivered on a daily or monthly basis. The same pattern of transfer, as I've said, means this applies if each distinct service is a performance obligation satisfied over time and the same method is used to measure progress. So just to give you a few examples of performance obligations, a sale of a machine, for example, is a distinct good because the machine can be identified on its own. A sale of a machine plus installation of the machine may be seen as a bundle if this installation is necessary to significantly modify the machine. So if the installation can't go of the machine can't operate without the installation, that will be seen as a bundle transaction, including the machine as well as installation required to get the machine operational. A one-year cleaning contract, for example, can be a series of distinct services because there is a contract in place for a repetitive service to be delivered either monthly or daily, and it is fixed for a one-year period. And that will be seen as a series of distinct services. Okay, we've already had a look at this definition where we said revenue is then income arising in the course of an entity's ordinary activities. So depending on your ordinary activity, this will be seen as your revenue that should be recognized. The standalone selling price of a good or service is the price at which an entity would sell a promised good or service separately to a customer. Okay, so that is your standalone selling price. The transaction price, on the other hand, is the amount of consideration to which an entity expects to be entitled in exchange for transferring promised good or service to a customer, excluding any amounts collected on behalf of third parties, such as value-added tax, for example. So even though we do collect that, it is part of the transaction price, you can't recognize this as revenue, because it is collected on behalf of a third party and it needs to be paid over to SARS at a specific point in time. It can't be seen as income arising through the course of ordinary activities, therefore it can't be recognized as revenue. So in summary, your transaction price is what you get, the amount that you receive, the total contract value. Whereas the stand-alone selling price is what each part is worth individually to allocate that total fairly to. It is defined by two criteria. The customer can benefit from it on its own or with other available resources, and the promise to transfer it is separately identified from other promises in the contract. So transaction price is the full contract value, including amounts that you collect on behalf of third parties. The standalone selling price is the value or the price that is allocated to each specific service or good within the contract negotiated with the customer. Still saying on our definitions is a contract, as we said, is agreement between at least two parties that creates those enforceable rights and obligations. A contract can be a written or an oral format, or it can be implied by an entity's customary business practices. When does a contract not exist? If each party to the contract has the unilateral enforceable right to terminate a wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party, so there's no rights or obligations involved. When is a contract wholly unperformed? It is if both of the following criteria are met. The entity has not yet transferred any goods or service to the customer. So there was an agreement that we would provide a certain good or service, but in this point in time, we have yet to transfer this to the customer. And we have not yet received, and we are not yet entitled to receive any consideration in exchange for this promised good or services. So if both of these are applicable, there are no enforceable rights or obligations. It means a contract is wholly unperformed, and therefore there won't be a contract in this situation that you need to deal with and determine if you have to apply the 5-step model in order to allocate any revenue to this situation. When there's any contract modification, so if you've got an existing contract and there needs to be a modification, it will be dealt with as a separate contract if both of the following conditions are present. The scope of the contract increases because of the addition of promised goods or services that are distinct. So the initial contract, we promised a certain product. Now there comes a contract modification. The customer wants another product to be added. So now the scope of the contract has increased because we need to add more promised goods or services that are distinct. This will also then result that the price of the contract will have to increase by adding new products. Okay. If that increases by an amount of consideration that reflects the entity's standalone selling prices of the additional promised goods or services and any appropriate adjustments to that price to reflect the circumstances of the particular contract. So a contract modification basically then involves both scenarios. It means the scope of the contract increases by adding goods or services, and the price of the contract will now also increase because more needs to be delivered. We need to adjust the content of this contract. And in this instance, such modification will be seen as a separate contract if both of these instances apply. You have to create a new contract, and based on that new contract, again, go through the 5-step module to account for revenue. Okay, the performance obligation. So we said, first of all, in the 5-step model, the contract, we've looked at what is a contract, what is not a contract, and any possible contract modification. The next is to identify the performance obligations at contract inception by assessing the goods or services promised in a contract with the customer and identifying as performance obligation each promise to transfer to the customer either a good or a service or a bundle of goods or services that is distinct, or a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same and have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. Okay, so we've already identified this where we've said a distinct good is a specific product that you sell, for example. Okay, so if we're manufacturing a specific machine and we sell that machine in our ordinary course of activity, that will be then a distinct item. A bundle of services will be, like we said, if you sell that machine, but it needs to include installation to be operational. And then a series of distinct goods or services is, for example, that 1-year clinic contract, where we'll provide a certain service, repeating it for a 1-year period on a daily or a monthly basis itself. So a good or a service that is promised to a customer is distinct if both of the following are met. As we've already discussed this earlier, the customer can benefit from the good or service either on their own or together with other resources that are readily available to the customer, and the entity's promise to transfer the good or service to the customer is separately identifiable from other promises within the contract. So it is distinct within the context of the contract itself. So depending on the contract, promised goods or services may include, but are not limited to, a sale of goods produced by an entity. Okay, in other words, our inventory that we manufacture and sell. So that can be seen as a promised good or service within a contract entered into with a customer. The resale of goods purchased by an entity. Okay, so the merchandise of a retailer. So if we are purely a retailer that don't manufacture anything, we just buy and sell items. Those items will be seen as our promised good or as our promised goods in this instance. If we have a resale of rights to goods or services purchased by an entity, a ticket that we resold by an entity acting as a principal. So if you're just a ticketing agency selling on behalf of this company or entity, that is the promised good or services that we deliver. Performing a contractually agreed upon task or task for a customer. So if you've been contracted to perform a specific task for a customer, providing a service of being ready to provide goods or services on unspecified, for example, unspecified updates to software that are provided on a when and if available basis, or of making goods and services available to customer for use as and when the customer desires. So if we are providing software inclusive of updates, then the service that we are offering is to provide those updates when they are required. So currently it might not be necessary, but in future there is a requirement within our contract to have a look at the update for this software for our customer. And that is our promised service within the contract, which becomes our performance obligation. If we are providing a service of arranging for another party to transfer goods or services to a customer, okay, so acting as an agent of another party, that is our performance obligation. That is the service that we need to deliver. If we are granting rights to goods or services to be provided in the future, which a customer can resell or provide to each customer, okay, so if we are an entity selling a product to a retailer, promises to transfer an additional good or service to an individual who purchases product from the retailer. Once again, that is our performance obligation. That is our obligation that we need to comply with. Any constructing, manufacturing, or developing an asset on behalf of a customer. So if we are contracted to construct and manufacture an asset, that is our performance obligation. We need to construct and have a final product available to the customer. Any granting of licenses, if we are an entity that grants licenses, that will be our performance obligation. Okay, or granting options to purchase additional goods or services when those options provide the customer with a material right will be the performance obligation that we need to contractually comply with as entered and agreed with our customer. Next, once we've identified the performance obligations within the contract, the next step says we need to determine the transaction price. So the amount of consideration which an entity expects to be entitled in terms of both the contracts and the customary business practices in exchange for transferring a promised good or services to a customer, excluding, as we've said, amounts collected on behalf of third parties, for example, value-added tax. So this consideration promised in a contract with a customer may include fixed amounts, variable amounts, or both. So the nature, timing, and amount of consideration promised by a customer will affect the estimate of the transaction price, and an entity considers the effect of all of the following. So to determine the transaction price, it is to determine what is the amount in total that will be collected. To be regarded as income and revenue will only be the amounts that we collected on behalf of ourselves and not of third parties. And it might consist of fixed amounts as well as variable amounts. So if the consideration promise includes a variable amount, an entity estimates and updates the estimate at the end of each reporting period. The amount of consideration to which the entity will be entitled to in exchange for transferring the promised goods or service to a customer. Now, this variable amount can be due to the fact that we can receive discounts, rebates, refunds, credits, price concessions, incentives, performance bonuses, or any penalties. So how the transaction price will be determined is to go back on what has happened in the past. For example, if we've got a refund policy, from past experience, you will know how much of your sales will normally be required to be refunded during a specific year. So as an example, say we determined through past experience that we refund a 5% of total sales. So meaning the transaction price, the variable amount to be recognized, will have to be excluding that 5%. Okay, to making provision for the variable amount and that refund at the end of the financial year, and then obviously updating this estimate at the end of each reporting period, because in the current year, there might have been more or less refunds. So it's just to determine that variable, that refund, the percentage, because that can't be recognized as revenue. We need to make an adjustment in your transaction price to compensate for potential refunds and then update that estimate on a yearly basis in determining the actual transaction price to be recognized as revenue. Just another example of this, if we've got returns under IFRS 15, a right of return does not create a separate performance obligation, but instead affects the amount of revenue recognized. So again, the same principle applies here with returns. Okay. In other words, if you sold something, you create the total and recognize the revenue. The customer has got the right to return the item. If it happens that they do return, there's not a separate performance obligation that needs to be created because it's part of the same original performance obligation. So if you receive the return, we will recognize a refund liability together with a returned asset because we receive back the product that will go back into inventory. Okay, representing items expected to be returned. So again, based on past experience, we will say that 5% returns take place. So we will create a 5% refund liability and a 5% right to return asset within the accounting records. You should then only recognize revenue to the extent it is highly probable that a significant reversal will occur at the time of the sale. So if we are highly certain and it's probable that the 5% will be returned, one should only recognize 95% revenue, in other words. Meaning the revenue is net of the expected returns. We create a refund liability for the expected return, and we create a right to return asset to recover products expected to be returned measured at cost. So straightforward, total sales was maybe 100,000 Rand. The data shows us that it is probable and certain that we'll receive 5% of that during the year, meaning 5% of 100,000 is 5,000. You should only recognize 95,000 in revenue. We create a refund liability that we need to pay back for 5,000, and we create a right to return asset for the 5,000, because as soon as those products are returned, it will go back into inventory. And then just remembering, this will be updated on a yearly basis. So if you've created a refund liability for 5,000 and only 3,000 is returned, it will be updated at the end of the year to make provision for the difference in 2,000. And it will be updated on a yearly basis to either update or increase or decrease that 5% provision that we do make. We also need to adjust the transaction price for the impact and effect of time value of money. In other words, if the timing of payments agreed to by the parties to the contract provides the customer or the entity with a significant benefit of financing the transfer of goods or service to the customer. So in other words, if we sell the item today, there is a financing component involved. We don't immediately receive the cash. We provide the opportunity to only pay, say, in a month or 2 months' time. So the transaction price needs to be adjusted for this time value of money consideration by determining what is the actual amount that we then can recognize now as revenue, even though the cash flow will only take place at a later stage. So the objective for such an adjustment is to recognize revenue at an amount that reflects the price that the customer would have paid for the promised goods or services if the customer has paid cash for those goods or services when they transfer to the customer. So it's just the adjustment for the time value of money depending on the credit risk and the implicit rate applicable on the transaction itself, that we need to adjust the transaction price for the time value of money to get the correct revenue that we can recognize on the date of the transaction itself, even though the actual cash flow will only be in future. So that is also important consideration over and above the variable amounts included that needs to be adjusted in your transaction price. Also consider time value of money to be included in the incorporation of the transaction price. So an entity needs to consider all the relevant facts and circumstances in assessing whether a contract contains a significant financing component, including both of the following. If the difference, if any, between the amount of promised consideration and the cash selling price of the promised goods or services, and the combined effect of the following, the expected length of time between transferring the promised goods or services to the customer payment and the prevailing interest rate in the relevant market. So both needs to be present. If there is a considerable difference between the cash selling price and the promised consideration, okay, in conjunction with the time it will take to get the money and the interest rates available, all of this needs to be used and considered in the calculation of the transaction price, because then it means there's a significant financing component involved due to the difference between the cash selling and the consideration and the actual time it will take with regards to settling the transaction price. If the transaction price for contracts in which a customer promises consideration in a form other than cash. So here we've got a contract. The transaction stipulates that the customer won't pay in cash. He would rather exchange maybe one of his products for our product. We need to determine a fair value for the non-cash consideration. If you cannot reasonably estimate the fair value of this consideration, the entity will measure the consideration indirectly by reference to the standalone selling price of the goods or services promises to the customer in exchange for the consideration. Okay, so if we can't establish what the fair value of the item is that we are offered, we need to be led in terms of IFRS 15 by referring to what is the standalone selling price of the good or service that we promise to the customer. And that will be considered to be the transaction price to be recognized as revenue on our behalf. The next step is then the allocation of the transaction price. Okay, so once we've established what is the transaction price, we need to actually allocate that transaction price. So the standalone selling price of the distinct good or service underlying each performance obligation in the contract is determined at contract inception, and the transaction price is allocated in proportion to those standalone selling prices. So the standalone selling price is a price at which an entity would sell a promised good or service separately to a customer. So the best evidence of a standalone selling price is the observable price when the entity sells that good or service separately in similar circumstances and to similar customers. So if we are producing a specific product, that product has got a retail price, for example. That is your standalone selling price, and that is a price that each customer will have to pay for that specific item. So that will naturally be the transaction price that needs to be allocated to each contract with a new customer. If that standalone selling price is for one or other reason not directly observable, an entity will estimate the standalone selling price by considering all available market conditions available or entity-specific factors, information about the customer or class of customer that is reasonably available at the entity. But in most instances, if you are, for example, a manufacturing concern, I mean, you've got fixed input costs, you've got a profit margin, so you've got a specific price at which you want to sell that product. It will only be in a scenario where it's such a unique product that it's not possible to allocate a specific value or transaction price to that we will have to use specific market conditions or entity-specific factors to determine what that standalone selling price is, which will be the transaction price that needs to be allocated. But in most instances, the standalone selling price will be the sales value of the item that we are selling or manufacturing to sell, or if we are retail business that we are buying and reselling at a specific amount. If a customer receives a discount for purchasing a bundle of goods or services, a customer receives a discount for purchasing a bundle of goods or services if the sum of the standalone selling prices of those goods or services promises in the contract exceeds the promised consideration in the contract. Okay, so if we add up the standalone selling prices of all these items and it's less than the total value of the contract, it means there is a discount offered in the service or product offered. Okay, so when an entity has observable evidence to allocate the entire discount to only one or more, but not all performance obligations in the contract, the entity will allocate the discount proportionally to all performance obligations in the contract. So say, for example, we've got three performance obligations. There is a discount. That discount will be offered proportionally to the standalone selling prices of the different performance obligations. So say, for example, performance obligation one has got a price or a transaction price of 3,000. Obligation number two has a price of 2,000, and the other one is a price of 1,000. In total, it adds up to 6,000 Rand. So if the discount needs to be allocated proportionally, it will be in the ratio of 3,000 over 6,000, 2,000 over 6,000, and 1,000 over 6,000 to proportionally correctly allocate the total discount of the contract to the different performance obligations. Okay, so the proportionate allocation of the discount in these circumstances is the result of the entity allocating the transaction price to each performance obligation on the basis of the relative standalone selling prices of the underlying distinct good or services, unless it is specifically clear that only one of the obligations should be considered for the discount. It should go in total against that performance obligation. But in normal circumstances, the discount will be proportionally allocated between the different performance obligations. The same applies in the term of variable considerations. It can be attributable to the entire contract or a specific part of the contract. So One or more, but not all performance obligations in a contract. A bonus may be contingent on an entity transferring a promised good or service within a specified period, or one or more, but not all distinct goods or services promised in a series of distinct goods or services that form part of a single performance obligation. So the consideration, for example, promised for the second year of a 2-year cleaning service contract will increase based on movements in a specified inflation index. Okay, so in this instance, it means that this service is offered at a specific value within year 1. And then obviously due to inflation, they will increase that value of the service offered in year 2. Meaning that for that specific contract, the variable price will be attributable to that entire contract that was entered into. So just the same principle, if you can specifically identify the variable amount, the discount, the rebate, or the return, and allocate that only to a single performance obligation, if it is clear. Other words, it will again be proportionally attributed and allocated between the different performance obligations if it has got an impact on the entire contract itself. After your contract inception, the transaction price may change for various reasons. An entity allocates to all the performance obligations of the contract any subsequent changes in the transaction price on the same basis as at contract inception. Thus, an entity does not reallocate the transaction price to reflect changes in standalone selling prices after contract inception. The amounts allocated to a satisfied performance obligation are recognized as revenue or as a reduction of revenue in a period in which the transaction price changes. So in this service contract, for example, you already recognize the revenue in year 1. So in the second year, all it will do is to recognize the increased change in amounts or in value of the service offered. Because the transaction price has now changed, it's not necessary to create a specific or a new contract. The amount is still allocated to a satisfied performance obligation. It is just a transaction price that has been updated due to inflation, for example. So it will go and still allocate the subsequent changes in transaction price on the same basis as at contract inception. The final step is to recognize revenue when the performance obligation has been satisfied. So when an asset is transferred or when the customer obtains control of the asset, it means that we have satisfied our performance obligation. So for each performance obligation identified, an entity determines at contract inception whether it satisfies the performance obligation over time or at a specific point in time. If an entity does not satisfy performance obligation over time, it then will be satisfied obviously at a point in time. So what does that exactly mean? Goods and services are assets, even if only momentarily, when they are received and used. So control of an asset refers to the ability to direct the use of and obtain substantially all the remaining benefits from the asset. Control includes the ability to prevent other entities from directing the use of and obtaining the benefits from the asset. So the benefits of an asset in such a situation can be potential cash flows, in inflows or savings and outflows that can be obtained directly or indirectly by using the asset to produce goods or provide services, by using the asset to enhance the value of other assets, by using the asset to settle liabilities or reduce expenses, by selling or exchanging the asset for cash flows, for pledging the asset to secure a loan. An entity will basically transfer control of goods or services over time and therefore satisfy a performance obligation and recognize revenue over time if one of the following criteria is met. The entity simultaneously receives and consumes the benefits provided by the entity's performance as the entity performs. The entity's performance creates or enhances an asset that the customer controls as the asset is created or enhanced. Or the entity's performance does not create an asset with alternative use to the entity, and the entity has an enforceable right to payment for performance completed to date. If it is not satisfied over time, we've said it is satisfied the performance obligation at a point in time. To determine that point in time at which a customer obtains control of a promised asset and the entity satisfies the performance obligation, the entity will need to consider requirements for control and the indicators of transfer of control, which might include the following. The entity has a present right to payment for the asset, okay, which is enforceable within the contract itself. The customer has legal title to the asset already. The entity has transferred the physical possession of the asset. The customer has significant risk and rewards of ownership of the asset. The customer has accepted the asset. So in all these instances, it means when this has happened, it will indicate that the transfer of control has taken place. And when that has been satisfied, it means we are at a point in time where the performance obligation has been satisfied. Therefore, if any of these are applicable, revenue should be recognized. Okay, that brings me to the end part of the theory with regards to IFRS 15 revenue recognition, the 5-step model to be followed, as well as all the relevant definitions. So let's go through 3 examples to look at a few practical examples of how we apply all of this theory. Our first example. So we've got on 1 March 2018, Lipton, a tea coffee manufacturer, sells a coffee machine for 150,000 to a customer on credit on the condition that the amount must be settled on 28 February 2020. The financing component is significant because there is a 2-year allowance to settle the outstanding balance. Okay. Lipton's incremental borrowing rate is 9% per annum, while the customer's credit risk is 15% per annum. We need to prepare the journal entries to determine and allocate the revenue from this specific transaction. So normally said then, with regards to the revenue recognition, is to determine at transaction date, what is the revenue looking at the standalone selling price. The standalone selling price in this instance is the 150,000 retail price. However, there is a financing component included in that the 150 will not be paid up front initially. It will only be settled 2 years later at 2020. So what it means, we will have to bring in consideration the time value of money to determine what is the revenue that can be recognized at a point in time and what is the revenue that will be satisfied over a period of time. So the financing component is considered to be significant in this calculation. So we base a calculation using the customer credit risk. The period involved is 2 years because 2 years is allowed for settlement. The customer's credit risk is seen as a 15% risk of not complying with regards to the contract to settle. There is no initial payment made. The future value is the 150,000 will be settled at the end of the period. Okay, so by using your financial calculator with our components and factors, you will calculate the current present value in time value of money's terms is 113,421.55. So that is the current present value of the 150,000 payable at the end of the contract that we've entered into. So the total finance component that is built in and to be recognized over the 2 years is the difference between the standalone selling price of 150 and the current present value of 113,000. So there is a total finance part built in of 36,000 Rand over the 2-year period. So how does it affect our revenue recognition? On date of transaction, we will recognize the revenue, the present value of 113, and we will create a contract asset, trade receivables for 113,000 rand. At the end of the first financial year, we will recognize the interest for the first year, which is the 15% on the outstanding balance originally recognized of 113,000. That will be added to the balance of the trade receivables, and we will recognize revenue through finance income of 17,000 rand. The same applies to the journal for the second year. The outstanding balance is now the original amount, the present value originally recognized. We add the interest added for the first year. On that, we calculate the interest payable of 15%, add the 19,500 to trade receivables, and in the second year, recognize finance income of 19,565. And then obviously, at the end of February, we will receive the payment. We will debit our bank account with the full 150,000, and we'll credit trade receivables of 150,000 because it has now been settled. And you will see then, based on the amounts that has gone through trade receivables, the trade receivables account will end up with a zero balance at the end of the year. So that is how we'll recognize revenue if there's an extended term for payment, is to determine the present value of the revenue to be recognized at the point in time, while the finance income is your revenue that will be recognized over a period of time until the final settlement takes place. Our second example. Bugatti enters the agreement with Mike for the sale of their latest SUV, along with a 4-year service plan for a total of 900,000 rand. Any client, however, may also acquire the exact same vehicle without a service plan. So you've got the choice and the option to just buy the vehicle without a service plan, and then the price of the vehicle is 860,000. For clients that later then want maybe to add a service plan, Bugatti sells this 4-year service plan at a value of 60,000 in total. The sale took place on the 1st of March, and the entity has a February year end. Gross profit percentage of 25% and service intervals are at the end of each financial year. Discuss and journalize above transactions in accounting records of Bugatti Limited. So here we need to determine within this contract, do we have separate performance obligations? If we have got separate performance obligations, do they have standalone selling prices on their own that can be identified in order to determine how the revenue needs to be recognized on date of transaction at that point in time, as well then over time, if there's any additional revenue that needs to be recognized in terms with the agreement and contract entered into between Bugatti and Mike. So Bugatti is required to deliver a vehicle and a service plan. So it is a single contract because it is negotiated as a package. It has a single commercial objective to provide a vehicle inclusive of a service plan. Okay, as far as performance obligations are concerned, are goods or services distinct within this agreement? Yes, the vehicle and the service plan are separately identifiable. They are, however, not interrelated and dependent on each other. They can be sold separately. Therefore, they are both distinct and two obligations, being the vehicle on its own and being the service plan on its own. So we need to account for separately as far as revenue recognition is concerned. In order to do that, we need to allocate the total consideration based on the best estimate standalone selling price of each. And how do we do that? So on its own, the Bugatti and the service plan has got standalone selling price of 860 and 60,000 separately. So if you were to buy these separate, you will pay a total amount of 920,000. Means in proportion, the vehicle has got a total selling price of 860 to the total value of 920,000. The ratio is 93.48 for the car, and the service plan is 60,000 over the total value of 920,000. It's got a contribution of 6.52%. Based on this ratio, we need then to allocate to the transaction price, which in total is 900,000. Remember, Mike is purchasing the vehicle inclusive with the service plan for 900,000 Rand. So the 900,000 is the total revenue to be recognized. We need to determine how much do we recognize now, how much do we recognize over time. So we can only recognize the allocation of the vehicle now because obviously the vehicle was delivered immediately. So 93.48% of the 900,000 is allocated to the car, whereas 6.52% is allocated to the service plan, which will be delivered over a 4-year period. So based on this allocation, our revenue recognition will be on date of transaction, we will debit our bank if we receive the cash. If you did not receive the cash, it will be a trade receivable for the full transaction price of 900,000. What we can recognize now as revenue is the 841,324, the Bugatti, the vehicle itself. The 58,000, however, is income that we received in advance for which we've not yet delivered the service, because we still need to provide the service at the end of the financial year. So currently, we will just create an income received in advance of 58,680, which is a liability for us that we still need to perform on. We will create our cost of sales and take out of inventory the vehicle itself, and the ratio is saying that we maintain a gross profit percentage of 25%, meaning the cost of sales is the other 75%. So we recognize on the sale that took place the cost of sales on the 900,000, and we take out of inventory the 75% of the vehicle, of the cost of the vehicle. Then over the period of time, it means now at the end of the current financial year, we can recognize the first portion of the service, because remember, we created liability to provide the service over a period of 4 years. So at the end of each year, we can only recognize the revenue as soon as the obligation has been met. So we will take out 1/4 of the 58,000 and now recognize that as revenue and reduce our liability by 14,000. And the journals for all subsequent years will be exactly the same, is to reduce the initial liability by now recognizing the revenue as it has basically materialized for us during that specific financial year. Okay, so just to recap, we need to distinguish between the two performance obligations. They are within a single contract. We need to determine the total revenue at initial recognition. The best way that we can do that is to allocate this consideration based on the best estimate being the standard selling prices of each, which was our 860 and the 60,000. We allocate the ratio, it determined appropriate ratio that we need to allocate it in. And we allocate the total revenue based on that, with the car immediately recognized as full revenue, while the service plan income or revenue is recognized over a period of 4 years. That we can only recognize a portion as soon as the obligation has been fulfilled at the end of the year in which the service was delivered. Okay, which brings us to our final question for today, a bit of a discussion type of question. So here we've got Hilo, who is a software developer, and they enter into the contract with Flow to transfer a software license, perform an installation service, and provide unspecified software updates and technical support for a 2-year period. Okay, so 4 different services. They provide the license, they do the installation, and they also provide software updates and any technical support that might be required for a 2-year contract period. So Hilo sells the license, installation service, and technical support separately. So you can buy each of these components separately or as a combination to include everything as a package. The installation service includes changing the web screen for each type of user. Okay, for example, for marketing, inventory management, and information technology. The installation service is routinely performed by other entities, and it does not significantly modify the software. So the software remains functional without the updates and the technical support. Discuss whether the goods or services promises in the contract by Hilo to Flow are distinct. Clearly indicate the performance obligations you identify in the contract based on the distinct promise discussion. So if we look at the discussion then with regards to this, Hilo assesses the goods and services promises to Flow Limited to determine which goods and services are distinct. They observe that the software is delivered before the other goods and services, and it remains functional without the updates or the technical support, meaning Flow Limited can benefit from the updates together with the software license transferred at the start of the contract. Therefore, Hilo concludes that Flow Limited can benefit from each of the goods and services either on their own or together with the other goods and services that are readily available. And so they can basically benefit from each of the goods and services separate on their own or together with the other goods and services that are readily available. Hilo also considers the factors in IFRS 15 and determines that the promise to transfer each good and service to Flow is separately identifiable from each of the other promises. So although it integrates the software into the customer system, the installation service does not significantly modify or customize the software itself. And as such, the software and the installation services do not significantly affect Flow's ability to use and benefit from the software license, because the installation services are routine and can be obtained even from alternative providers. So, they further observe that none of the promised goods or services significantly modify or customize one another, nor is Hilo providing a significant service of integrating the software and services into a combined output. So we can conclude that the software and the services do not significantly affect each other, and they are thus not highly interdependent or highly interrelated, because Hilo would still be able to fulfill its promise to transfer the initial software license independently from its promise to subsequently provide the installation service, the software updates, as well as the technical support. So based on these observations and information provided and the regulations in terms of IFRS 15, it means we can identify 4 performance obligations in the contract: the software license, the installation service, the software updates, and the technical support. So there are 4 different obligations within the same contract for the following goods or services that they need to comply with in terms of the contract with the customer. So they've got a performance obligation for the software license, the installation service, the software update, as well as the technical support required. And that brings me to the end of our session, looking at a few practical examples on IFRS 15. So I will then just go and close my presentation and then run through the Q&A to see if there are any questions that we need to address. Thank you so much. Guys, feel free to drop any questions you might have in the Q&A section. We've still got about 10 minutes or so in this session, and we can quickly run through any questions that you might have. I can just see one question there already was with regards to the cost of sales on that Bugatti vehicle. Why it's 75%? Because the question states that the gross profit is 25%. Remember that old accounting one formula, selling price is equal to gross profit plus cost of sales. So if the gross profit is 25%, you subtract that from the 100 sales price, it gives you the 75%, which will be the cost of sales amount. I hope that clears that question up. Yeah, feel free to drop any more questions in the section that you might have. I don't see any new questions yet, but we still have some time left. So any questions you might still have, please pop them in there. Okay, let's see there. Kindly confirm when will assessment 2 marks be released. Additionally, I see FSC 261 has a preliminary exam date for 16 May. How likely is this to change? Okay, regarding the assessment 2 marks, we are still busy with that marking. It is a bit of a process. We are rather limited on resources, but obviously the marking needs to be concluded before the exam. So at this point, it's difficult to give a pinpoint an exact date on when the marks will be released, but we're trying our utmost to get that done as soon as possible. As far as exam date is concerned, just once again, that is the prerogative and it's administered by exam department. We are not involved in that process. We do understand also the preliminary date that has been communicated to us as well by students. We don't even know the date as yet. We do understand currently it sits at 16 May. There is still a chance that it might change. We'll have to wait for the final timetable, which you all should receive as soon as it's been finalized by exam department. So as soon as they finalize the timetable, it will be sent out and made available to all students. So yes, maybe it's 16 May, maybe there's still a chance that it will change within due time. I think normally the timetable should be released in early May, hopefully, to give us a clear indication of when exactly this exam date will be. Okay, no new questions in as yet. Still have another 5-10 minutes for our session, so feel free, drop any questions you might have in the Q&A section. I'm still looking through the Q&A section. I haven't noted any new questions. As I say, we still have some time left. Feel free if you've got any questions remaining, and I'll see if I can answer those questions for you. And let's say we give it another 5 minutes. So 5 more minutes for our session before I'll wrap up and close the session for today. Okay, nothing new as yet in the Q&A section. Let's give it another 3 minutes. Okay, so let's give it 2 more minutes to wrap up to your final 2-minute call for any questions that you might have on the session today, or if there's anything else that you might require any information or assistance on. It's your 2-minute call to drop it in the Q&A section before I wrap up our session today. I'm still scanning through the Q&A section. No new questions as yet. Final minute. Should you have anything that you want to get off your chest, please drop in there in the Q&A section. If you don't get the opportunity or you don't have any question at the current moment, like you say, indicate that you do have our communication channels available. Send us an email at fac2601@uniso.ac.za, and we will get back to you and respond to any queries or issues that you might have. So feel free to send us an email or engage on your discussion forum, whichever you are more comfortable with. Okay, it seems like time has nearly run out. I don't see any new questions coming through in the Q&A section. Just the final few seconds, maybe something will pop in. Otherwise, I'm going to end our session for today. Final call, Q&A, nothing in there. Okay, thank you so much for your attendance today. I do appreciate it. Like I mentioned, the recording will be made available later during the day. Once again, it will be available on the module site. Just use the navigation tab. You scroll down until you find online class 8, and there you will find the recording as well as the slides for today's session. Yeah, other than that, that is my story for today. Thank you so much for your attendance. I wish you all the best. Good luck, keep well, and God bless. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.